Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We're coming to you live courtesy of our broadcasting partner, moretalk.tv. We're lucky to share with you today an interview recorded with one of my favorite speakers, James Tyberonn. James is a professional engineer and a geologist for the past 33 years, and he's studied the Earth on every continent, traveling to over 85 countries. He has devoted himself to intense metaphysical studies of varied disciplines. He focuses on understanding the energy of the living Earth from both a scientific and a metaphysical perspective. He is widely considered one of the world's most knowledgeable experts on Earth energies, crystals and gemstones, sacred sites, and the planetary grid system. You can learn more about his work by visiting his website at earth-keeper.com. Hope everyone enjoys my interview with James Tyberonn.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show today, James. I really appreciate having you back on.
Brenton, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. The ARE is just an incredible organization, and as I mentioned earlier, Edgar Cayce has played a very, very profound role in my spiritual awakening, so it's an honor to be here.
Wonderful. You and me both.
And we left off part one of our interview with you discussing the second moon of Atlantis, so if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and pick right back up there.
And had you found any previous research on anything talking about a second moon of Atlantis?
Well, most of that comes, I became, after 2000, I retired from my geology job after 33 years in 2009. And I began having, about the year 2000, I began having a great interest in fasting. And so, starting in about 1998 up until about 2005, actually until 2007, I would go once a year, and I had found a Lakota-style facilitator. And I was looking for ways to fast, and then it just came to me that I should do a vision quest in the way that the Native Americans did. And so I found a facilitator and did my own version of that I will call a prayer quest. But I fasted for 5 days. And I did this for 4 years in a row, where I would not take any water or food the first 3 days and no food for the entire period. And so I began fasting once a year and it actually turned out to be 6 days, because I would make prayer ties and do that while I was in a state of fasting.
Right.
And so I went to the Yaqui Reservation in Mexico that was mentioned in the Carlos Castaneda books, and I did it in Sedona, in Flagstaff. And so for 4 years in a row, I fasted 5 days, and then I did it again at Mount Shasta for 5 days, and 2 more years in Arizona. But I did those last 2 times in what I call vision questing with aerobics. I did Native American dancing while you were fasting. But my 3rd year of doing that, my first 2 years, not much happened outside of the fact that I felt a great sense of direction in doing this, but I did not have a vision. The 3rd year that I did it, I had an out-of-body experience, and I speak about that in my 2nd book. I've written 5 books, and it was just an incredible frequential shift, because I was absolutely able to leave my body and lucidly experience teachers, and so from that point forward, I began channeling. The channeling actually began to occur in 2007, and I retired in 2009. So a lot of the information that I speak about on the Atlantean second moon came from my own vision that occurred after I had completed these vision quests. And I also went down to South America and went into the Bolivian and Peruvian Andes and had some experiences there in shamanic visioning that were very profound. And so, but while I was there, I did do a little bit of study, and and found that there was this belief that one time the Earth had 2 moons. But I very, very much believe that second moon was an artificial moon.
Right.
Not to say that the one we have now is not artificial, but that was a crystal satellite that I believe was used to redirect a lot of the beams from these Atlantean crystals. And so I will be talking about that at the ARE conference in April in greater detail. And so if any of the listeners are interested in that, it would be wonderful for you to come to the ARE Atlantean conference in April of 2014. And so that would be a great opportunity for people to come and hear about the Atlantean Society, the Atlantean crystals, and the Egyptian societies. And no one teaches that better than John Van Auken.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you for doing that. I look forward to that for sure.
Well, it's a great honor. I consider Edgar Cayce to be one of the most prolific sources of truth that has ever existed on the planet, and so his work influenced me tremendously. And the Edgar Cayce work, and I've studied all sorts of metaphysics, Brent, in 30 years of living overseas, and I read everything. I read and studied Buddhism, Zoroastrianism. I even read the Quran, and lived in the Middle East a number of years. And so I was a foreigner and studied everything. I read all of the Seth books, Lobsang Rampo books, Castaneda books, shamanism, and it is the Edgar Cayce material that carries what I consider to be the Christ energy. It is that energy of nurturing. Cayce actually made the statement in one of his readings that mankind would come closer to understanding the nature of God through science than through religion.
Wow.
And so I studied a lot of scientific material. I have a scientific background. And I studied a lot, and I teach a lot about multidimensionality and that sort of genre of information.
Right.
But it is the Cayce information that sort of centers me, that brings me back to that sense of karma, that sense of spirituality, that Christ sense of love, I think, is incorporated with the highest integrity through the Edgar Cayce work, more than any other material that is out there. And all of it is valid.
Right. I cannot agree more.
It is worthwhile under studying the scientific aspects of sacred geometry, of multidimensionality, of gemstones and all of these other things that involve scientific applications. I've written several books about the grid systems of the planet, of sacred sites and power nodes, and of course as a geologist I've had a great compassion and interest in sacred sites. I've not spoken about that yet at the ARE, but I have visited more than 100 countries across the planet, and that was an opportunity given to me by the job that I had. And so my travel always incorporated me visiting what I considered to be a sacred site. And so I've written about what I think a sacred site is, and a lot of that ties into the mineralogy, which in a sense ties back in again to the gemstone things. But it is the Edgar Cayce information that always brings me back to center, that brings me back to that sense of understanding the importance of the Christ energy as expressed in love. And so I think that is the gift that the ARE brings. And it is a really phenomenal organization.
Thank you. We're honored to have you a part, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You talked quite a bit about sacred sites and your chance that you've had to visit so many around the world, and also about kind of the crystalline grid system that kind of links them all together. You talk also about power nodes in your book. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly a power node is?
Yeah, I think that power sites on the planet are areas that carry a greater energy. I think that, and a lot of people have spoken about these, and I believe that there is a grid system around planet Earth. Plato spoke about that. He said that when someone viewed the Earth from a great distance, the Earth looked like a ball with 12 patches, meaning a dodecahedron.
And we'll be right back with more from James Tiburon here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. And welcome back to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We'll get right back into my interview with James Tiburon.
And so I think that the grid systems that have surrounded the Earth, going all the way back to the biblical reference of the firmament, and I think the firmament was a grid, I think these are geometric polyhedrons that surround our planet that allow us, in a sense, to pass into physical duality and biology. And I think that there are power nodes on the planet based on their correlation and alignment to the grid systems. And another way to think of grids are a subject that I studied with a lot of intensity because there's so many people that I think are a little bit confused when it comes to grids, including me. And so my final interpretation is that grids are programs, and I call the new grid, which I think came in place on December 21st of last year, 2012, I refer to the grid systems as Windows 2012. In other words, it's a program that allows us a lot more utility.
Right.
And it has a geometric nature, and if of course our computers are all based on silicon as well.
Right.
Memory and things of that nature all coming from quartz. But I think that we have a crystalline grid in place now that has a silicon-esque vibration and a far more complex geology. I think that there are certain places on the planet, because of their mineral structure, that have a higher energy. I mean, the campestral societies, the indigenous peoples, always seem to locate places that they called holy lands, places where they would go to do a vision quest, places that they would go to hold ceremonies. So I think that there is higher frequency that occurs in certain places of the earth for a number of reasons. The primary reason being a very, very powerful mineralogical structure. For example, if you go to an area in Arkansas that is pure quartz crystals, it has faster energy, and you can feel that. You can feel that in Brazil in the crystal pockets.
Right.
If you go to certain mountains that are volcanic in nature, like Mount Shasta in California, you definitely feel that there is a very, very unique energy there. And, one of the telltale markings is that most of these places, whether it be the crystal beds of Arkansas or of the red rocks of Sedona, Arizona, or the incredible volcanoes in the Cascade Mountains in the Pacific Northwest, the indigenous always recognized it. They were campestral. They felt the energy of the natural kingdom easily, and so they knew that certain places might have more resonance, more frequency than others, and that by going to certain of these places, they could more easily meditate. They could more easily commune with the spirits of nature and of what they referred to as Great Spirit. And so I teach this from a perspective of ionic ratio to bring in the science. And a lot of what I try to do is to bring in the science into metaphysics. I think that traditionally science has omitted the sacred and religion has not included the science. And so I think in this new millennia we bring the two together. And what was it Cayce said? That we would understand the true nature of God more quickly through science than we would through religion. I think we bring in the integral pieces. And so I think what occurs in sacred sites is a higher energy frequency, and that frequency can occur through stellar grid lines, stellar angles, sacred geometry, and it can occur through movements of plasma. For example, every time you have moving water, you have a plasmic field above it that creates a sense of well-being. And then, that is science. When you go to a ocean front, the waves, the water releases ions that form a plasmic pool, plasma simply being subatomic particles. And so you have all of these anionic charges above the coast of the of any ocean, of any moving water. And so when anions collate, when they gather together, they create a sense of well-being. And there are studies at certain universities using ion generators that validate not only do they create a sort of sense of euphoria, they open vision, that people can have what the academics refer to as hallucinations in certain anionic to cationic ratios. And so I'll speak about that in April as well. But I look at sacred sites as being places that have higher background energy that affects the vibration of our chakra systems and opens what Cayce referred to as the one eye, the pineal gland. I believe the pineal gland is opened when the ionic ratio is shifted, and that the indigenous people knew this. And so they went to certain places that maybe had a different anion to cation background, because it enabled them to experience higher dimensions more easily.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. Edgar Cayce also spoke about a new human, a fifth race emerging in the new millennia, this kind of time that we're living in. And you spoke a little bit on this in Virginia Beach with quite an interesting perspective. Can you share your thoughts on this topic?
Yes, and let me say that John Van Auken has written an article called "The Origins of Humanity." John Van Auken has a newsletter that he calls "Living in the Light," and I would highly recommend that any listener, any member of the ARE, or anyone interested in spirituality subscribe to John's newsletter. I think it's available online, and it is just a wealth of information. John, I think, has written over 30 books, and so he speaks in one of these, The Origins of Humanity, about Edgar Cayce stating that there had been 4 body types, 4 root races, and that a 5th body type, or 5th root race, is to appear during our present new millennium. And so that is something that synchronistically, I only read that article from John a few weeks before I went to the conference in Virginia Beach.
Oh, wow.
But I had been writing about the human body, the human chassis type, making a switch from being carbon-based to silicon-based. And, quartz, and of course we've been talking about crystals this entire program. Quartz is silicon dioxide.
Right.
And so the active ingredient in quartz is silicon. And so I believe that the earlier phases, of Atlantis had manifestations of light forms that had a far lesser density, and that we evolved into physical beings of greater density with carbon base. Well, Carl Sagan, who is a very well-known cosmologist and astrophysicist, he wrote the book Cosmos that has been made into a movie. He suggested 30 years ago that if there were any other base for human that could support human biology other than carbon, and we are carbon-based physically now, that it would be silicon. And when I read that a few years ago, that absolutely resonated with me.
Right.
We, in the new millennium, would be shifting into silicon-based beings, becoming human crystals to a certain degree. And the reason that silicon is the only other viable way of supporting our biology is because it also has 4 valences, 4 ways to connect into complex compounds, and carbon is the only other one that does that. Silicon, in a certain way, would offer advantages and make us a almost luminescent being. And in my research and in my visions, I see us as becoming somewhat less dense in the future. it's interesting, Brent, that when I was at the ARE, I asked the audience, how many of you think that the Ascension occurred on December 21st, 2012? And not very many people in the room raised their hand. And that's appropriate, because if you look around, it's obvious we are not an ascended society. And so what I have been telling people for the last 3 years is that the December 21st, 2012, quote-unquote, ascension was not the ascension of mankind. Rather, it was the ascension of the planet. It was the shifting of the planet into 12 dimensions. And I will speak about that at the event in April as well. And so I think what happened on December 21st, 2012 was that the Earth shifted into a 12-dimensional spectrum, and that is the matrix that will allow us, the race of humanity, to ascend. I don't think that's going to happen for another 300 years or so, but I think that there are some significant changes that have occurred on the planet that are powered by solar radiation. In about 580,000 years ago, we had an event on the planet called the Cambrian radiation, the Cambrian explosion. And it was during that phase that the Earth actually started showing evidence of higher forms of life. All of the biological forms that became mammals, etc., first came into being during the Cambrian radiation, which was a time of great solar activity. And so the solar radiation that has been happening since 1989, in which more X-class coronal mass ejections have been hitting the Earth in any other time in recorded history, is absolutely shifting our DNA.
And we'll be right back with more from James Tiburon here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. And welcome back to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We'll get right back into my interview with James Tiburon.
And there is hard scientific facts to support this. Dr. Greg Braden was the first to talk about this, and so has several documented Russian scientists, as well as Susan Joy Renison, who is an astrobiologist. And so there's a lot of reasons why our DNA can be slowly shifting now. The Human Genome Project is showing that our DNA appears to have shifted as much as 10% in the last 20 years. And so I do think there is a new body form emerging. I think that the shift of the planet through the coronal mass ejection is creating a new explosion, you might say, that I call the Aquarian shift. And I'll talk about that more in Virginia Beach.
Wow, so much to look forward to. I'm excited. In April of 2014, you will be a keynote speaker at the conference entitled We Are the Atlanteans, Lemuria, Atlantis, and the Egyptian Connection. And what exactly can conference attendees expect to take away from this upcoming conference?
Well, in this conference, which will be, I believe, the first weekend of April in 2014 at the ARE headquarters in Virginia Beach, Virginia, I'll be speaking alongside John Van Auken, and John's going to talk primarily about the Egyptians, but keep in mind that Egypt was an Atlantean colony,
right.
An Atlantean colony during the time of Atlantis, and so there was a lot of movement between Egypt and Atlantis. And in fact, at the time that Atlantis began its final breakup, literally thousands of, and Cayce speaks about this, thousands of Atlanteans migrated or exited Atlantis to go to Egypt. So I'm going to speak at that conference about the final days of Atlantis, what I believe the technology in Atlantis was, and there'll be a focus on the division between the two major groups in Atlantis, the sons of Belial and the Law of One group. And Cayce speaks about our soul family as being the law of one. The Metatronic readings also speak in depth about the law of one grouping. And we lived primarily on the island of Poseida. And so I'll be speaking not only about the phases, the three major phases of Atlantis, but also about the crystal technology. I am a geologist and a gemologist, and so I've always had a fascination for crystals. And I grew up in Arkansas, which a lot of people may not be aware is the largest single strata of quartz crystal on the earth. Wow. And so I grew up amid quartz crystals. My father was with the University of Arkansas Law School, and he was an avid outdoorsman. And so many weekends we would drive from Little Rock to Crystal Springs, Arkansas, which was about a 40-minute drive from where we lived, and it was a lake absolutely covered on the bottom with quartz crystals, and so I would dive in the waters in the summer and collect quartz crystals while he fished. Right. So I spent the first 23 years of my life among the crystals of Arkansas, and then I moved to Brazil as a geologist, which is the other major location of quartz. So I was a rock hound from as early as I can remember, and I spent a significant amount of my time in these major deposits of crystals. And in retrospect, that makes a lot of sense to me because I know that I worked with those in Atlantis. Right. And so that conference in Virginia Beach will be absolutely an amazing gathering. It is a return, in a sense, of the law of one. And Cayce spoke in great detail about the return of the law of one, about the return of the Atlanteans. And so I'm going to speak a little bit about what I think we learned from Atlantis and what our responsibilities are as we move forward in 2014. And right after that event, I have John Van Auken, who is one of my mentors, a person that I hold in incredible esteem. I think he is an amazing man. And so John Van Auken has graciously agreed to be a speaker at the Earth Keeper Conference, which will be held in Scottsdale, Arizona at the end of May during Memorial Day weekend. That's a 4-day event. And so John will be one of our featured speakers there, as well as Robert Schott, who is a PhD that has done a lot of work in Egypt.
Wow, great. Look forward to all that. We'll make sure we give the listeners all the information to register for that.
Fantastic.
And in part one of our interview, we discussed power nodes a little bit and their connection to sacred sites. And this, I'm sure, is very important to a lot of people as more people seem to be flocking to these sacred sites around the world. What role do you see these sacred sites playing in kind of the conscious evolution of humanity in the years to come?
Well, I think that first let me define my interpretation of power nodes and / sacred sites. I think that there are different types of sacred sites, but I think a common theme of sacred sites is that most of them exist on what I call a power node. I would refer to a power node as a location on the planet where the energy is higher, where there is a greater life force, you might say. Right. And I think the ancients recognized this, and so that's why many of what we term as temples and pyramids and sacred sites were deliberately placed on locations that were perhaps the intersection of Earth current energies called ley lines or dragon lines in Asia, and other locations had stellar or planetary grid points where the energy was also embellished. And, the indigenous peoples always had certain places that they called their holy grounds, their places for their vision quests. And almost always, these were locations where the earth energy was enhanced. And I think that the factors that create this embellished energy involves, as I mentioned, ley line intersections, but also the mineralogy. Many of these locations are around enormous deposits of quartz or of gold or of copper or of other minerals that have a positive effect on the human chakra system. In other words, it opens our third eye to a certain degree and allows us to, quote unquote, thin the veil. And so I think that the reason people are drawn to these places is because we can go there and get a strong sense of our purpose. We have a more easy, a more facilitated ability to reach deeper states of meditation and communicate with the divine in these locations. And as we have gone beyond 2012, coming now to the end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014, I believe that we are in a new planetary paradigm. I believe that we are in the stages in which advancement can occur far more rapidly. And there are certain places on the planet that we can go to sort of realign our chakra system, to recharge ourselves with energy. Places like the crystal beds of Arkansas, places like like the Holy Lands in Israel, places like Delphi in Greece, Easter Island. All of these places that have sort of a clear stream energy,
right,
are very important. And the other point that I think is very important in 2014 and beyond is that when we go to these areas of greater energy, it's easier for us to project thought into reality.
Oh.
That is why I believe that the indigenous people did their vision quests. They went to these places in order to manifest the reality, to get an idea of their true purpose, and then to manifest their goals.
Right.
And the reason I think this, the reason I believe this, and Metatron speaks in depth about this, is that consciousness units, and let me repeat that phrase, consciousness units, or life force, or what may be called akashic energy, exist more in a greater concentration in certain sacred sites, or in most power nodes. And so it is consciousness units, it is life force that allows us to reach theta consciousness in meditation.
And we'll be right back with more from James Tiburon here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. And welcome back to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We'll get right back into my interview with James Tiburon.
And then manifest our reality by focusing on them, because we do co-create our realities.
Right.
So power nodes play an important role in this, and the ancients knew that.
Right, absolutely. Great. If you could give one piece of advice to those who are struggling to kind of focus on the positive changes, as there's a lot of sources of media and things that are trying to pump out the negativity more in order to kind of keep people from focusing on the positive stuff that's going on, what would be that one piece of advice that you would give people?
Well, that's a great question, Brenton. And so I think that it's important to always come back to the base knowledge that we are on the planet Earth for purpose. And that purpose is to learn how to be responsible creators. The Earth is a duality planet. It is a place where both sides of the spectrum exist. It is a place where we learn to make the right decisions so that we can reach our own quote-unquote godhood, our own divinity. But by being in duality, we are going to deal with the results of our mistakes, the results of our errors. But beyond that, we are always in physical lifetimes going to face a certain amount of obstruction. There will always be challenges. And so my advice would be to understand that as long as we are in duality, the polarity comes into effect. There is the negative aspects and the positive aspects. And it is our role here to face our challenges. And so my advice is that don't be discouraged when you see all the 3D things happening around you. You see all the wars, all the greed, all the incidences of man's inhumanity to man. That's part of our duality. That is the nature of duality. And so it is our responsibility to co-create the new earth, the positive earth, and it's essential to remain focused, to remain positive, and not be discouraged. A lot of people think of negative energies as hate, as you know, of war and all of these other things. But Edgar Cayce stated that fear was the great destroyer.
Right.
Fear was the great destroyer. And an aspect of fear is worry, and another aspect of fear is depression. So it is essential to love yourself and to project that positive energy, because our collective thoughts, our individual and collective thoughts, co-create the new planet. And it is our role in the new earth to project the way that we want our world to be and not be discouraged by duality. Many people thought that after the 2012 Ascension, the third dimension was going to go away. And Metatron has always said that it would not go away, that it couldn't go away, that what happens in 2012, what did occur in 2012, was the expansion of the Earth to 12 full dimensions. We still have to keep our feet grounded in the third dimension, because that's the dimension of duality, but we can mentally project into the higher dimensions and bring those into effect. That is our challenge. That is what I think Edgar Cayce encourages us to do, is to co-create in positive love, and love is the key, the world that we want to create.
Wow, thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Brenton. And as I say, the ARE is just a phenomenal organization, one in which I think has attracted people from the Law of One. So I hope that the listeners will consider joining us in Virginia Beach and in the last weekend of May in Scottsdale, Arizona for the Earthkeeper Conference. And my website is www.earth-keeper.com.
Wonderful. I'll give them all the extra information to register for all that, and it is an honor to have you as a part of the ARE, so thank you so much, James.
Thank you so much.
Hope everyone enjoyed listening to James Tiburon. To learn more about James and his incredible work, you can visit his website at earth-keeper.com. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment and moretalk.tv, I'm your host, Brenton Bickerstaff, reminding you that there is so much more to our universe than what's captured by our physical senses. I encourage everyone to dedicate time to exploring the metaphysical realms and see what beautiful truths you can uncover for yourself. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a wonderful week, everybody. And now it's time for the thought for the day here on Reflections. And joining us as always is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on for the thought for the day.
Thank you again for having me, Ben. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. And if you can go ahead and read the Cayce thought for the day today for the listeners.
I'd be happy to. This comes from reading 1301-1. As you have applied that you have gained, so does the ability come to be of that help, that aid to those who are stumbling, some blindly, some gropingly, some discouraged, some over-anxious, some overzealous of their own peculiar twist or turn, yet all seeking the light. You know, we keep coming back to applying what we learn. And Not too long ago, I was going through the Search for God book, and that first chapter is on meditation, and I feel that Cayce really recommended meditation for communication with the divine within us, and then action, applying it in a way of service to our fellow man. And so when the reading says, as you have applied that you have gained, I feel like we've gained our understanding in meditation, a deeper understanding. And then we go out into the world and we try to apply it. And we do the best we can with that. You know, we meet all kinds of different people. And it's not that we have to go out and say, oh, who's my target today that I can really, you know, apply this. They're brought to us. You know, they show up from all over the place, from all walks of life, and with all different temperaments, as he's talking about here. But we all have the same goal. We're all seeking the same light. And if we can be an encouraging force for that individual, then I think we've done our job. Then we have been of service. Then we've been of aid. Then we have tried to help Christ help the world.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, I love this. I really like the this has two things in it, and you touched on it. You said as you have applied that you have gained, so does the ability come to be of that help. And you reference meditation. I think that's so essential. For me personally, the more I meditate, the more it actually shifts my outer world. Not so much changing things in the physical world, but that inner journey, the more time you spend in the state of meditation, connecting with that source, um, it really changes the way you react to your outer environment. So if you're working with something like patience, or you're working with a particularly difficult relationship, it shifts that relationship because it creates shifts inside yourself the more you spend time in meditation and make a point to do it daily. I think that in itself is an incredible gift of meditation because it allows you to be more helpful, because it centers you. You know, it makes it so you're not so fire at the hip, pulled in every direction. You have that more balanced state of living. The other thing I really like about this is the last part. It says, "Yet all are seeking the light," like you said. But before that, he goes on to talk about how everyone is dealing with different conditions. Some are discouraged, some over anxious, some overzealous. I love that because at my job in particular, you look around and you wonder if everybody really has that awareness of, you know, he says we all are seeking light, but you wonder when you look around at the world. I mean, you can't help but wonder. Um, but it is having that perspective. You realize that you don't know what everybody's going through, and you realize that, wow, you know, they could be going through something completely different, and I may seem like I'm on one path that, you know, is really helping me to reach the light, but everybody, absolutely everybody, is really on that path. It's just they're dealing with what is presented to them based on their decisions that they make daily, which is, of course, the karmic principle that's talked about a lot in the readings.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
we all have our own definition of what seeking that light means.
Right.
And you know, for me, part of that is I'm seeking that inner peace, that inner contentment, that inner happiness. I think we're all looking for that.
Absolutely.
And because of our circumstances, as you were just talking about, we may be looking in some pretty strange directions,
Mm-hmm.
but we're all looking for that inner peace, that peace of mind, that connection with the divine within.
Absolutely. And we're very blessed to have something like the Cayce material. And of course, there's so many other sources of material that go hand in hand in that, because they give you a guiding point to get to the light. They help you out along the way, because I think it's something that's really looked over in at least Western culture. I noticed in my upbringing, there's not somebody openly, they're not teaching every kid how to, seek the light in their own particular way. So of course you see a lot of, like you said, a lot of weird ways of looking for it. But of course that's the human condition. That's what we're going through. But it's very beautiful to have something like the Cayce material, because it's like a beacon helping you, stay focused on the light.
It is a beacon. Nice way to put that, Brent.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Bill. It's always a pleasure having you on for the thought for the day. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it, Brent. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll see you next week.